Four adventure middleweight bikes with a 21-inch front wheel and a bit more than 100 horsepower go head-to-head in a direct comparison. On paper, they all look pretty similar, but out in the real world, the differences are huge. And we've ridden them to find out for you. Welcome to 1000 PS TV. It doesn't happen very often that we, as the 1000 PS team, suddenly meet up abroad at a presentation, but this time that's exactly what happened. We're here for the launch of the Conti TKC 80 Generation 2, right in the middle of the Algarve, and by pure coincidence, we've got the entire expert team from 1000 PS gathered here. And by that, I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about Bernd Hiemer, former Supermoto World Champion, European champion, stunt rider, riding coach, and so on. And Wolf. Wolf is our travel expert, the guy who racks up the most kilometers every year and can tell you a lot about the long distance capability of these bikes. And yes, we were pretty busy today. We covered a lot of kilometers, not just on the road, but also off-road. And we really put the BMW F900 GS, the Honda Africa Twin, both with DCT and without the DCT gearbox, the KTM 890 Adventure and the Triumph Tiger 900 Rally Pro through their paces. All right, let's start straight away with the expert here in the house. Bernd, what were your riding impressions of the bikes today? Which one would you say feels the most like home to you? And where would you say the biggest focus is on off-road performance and where more on road riding?
Yeah, it's not that easy to answer. We're actually here for the tire presentation from Conti. And the special thing about it is the 50-50 concept, road and off-road. We had both today, so every bike has its advantages and disadvantages somewhere, and you have to look at them a bit more closely. Off-road, the KTM was a top choice for me. I felt very comfortable on it, simply because of the setup and a lot of other aspects, but I also felt very good on the BMW. Those two were my top models when it came to riding off-road.
All right, then I'll pass it straight over to Wolf. Wolf, what about your experience on longer trips? In terms of touring comfort, Bernd mentioned the BMW and the KTM. How do you see it? Do you think that's enough comfort for traveling, or would you wish for more? How did your tours on them feel?
For me, it's enough touring comfort, but to be honest, you do need a bit of toughness, because when you look at these four models, the Africa Twin and the Triumph Tiger are definitely the more comfortable ones. That means they're better suited for long distances and probably also nicer if you're traveling with a passenger. And as we also found out today, they can still do quite a lot once you leave the tarmac. Bernd is absolutely right though. I also feel most comfortable on the KTM here, mainly because of the low center of gravity thanks to the tank that drops down along the sides. That makes it quite playful to ride up steeper, rougher climbs. It's definitely good fun. But if you're really looking for a proper travel bike, then you should also take a look at those two. And the BMW is also very, very agile. As we mentioned earlier, all four bikes run a 21-inch front wheel, but two of them have an 18-inch rear wheel and two have a 17-inch rear. And at least in my opinion, Bernd probably knows this even better than I do, the rear wheel size isn't quite as crucial because the GS, the F900 GS, was so easy and playful to ride even on unpaved roads that you never really felt like you were missing the 18-inch rear wheel that's usually considered the standard enduro size. And it's similar with the Triumph. The Triumph's engine development, or rather its power delivery, is a bit more relaxed. I think you said more relaxed or maybe slower, however you want to call it. But I actually find that quite nice because you can ride it in a very smooth and quiet way. If you're not riding flat out all the time, it's actually wonderful for off-road travel.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm actually a big fan of the KTM because that's the bike I've done the most off-road kilometers on so far, especially in America, at 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers. But today I was really surprised by the BMW, which is just as capable and easy to handle off-road. Of course, the center of gravity is a bit higher, you can feel that, but in my opinion, it's actually quite an underrated bike. What do you think, Bernd, about the point Wolf just mentioned regarding the 17-inch rear wheel? Not that important. The front wheel matters more?
Well, let's put it this way. The tires were identical on all of them. That was actually the big advantage. Every bike was running exactly the same tires. So this wasn't really a tire test as such. It meant we could compare the bikes one-to-one. And in that situation, whether it's 17 or 18 inches at the rear, you don't really feel a major difference. So I absolutely agree with that. And something else to keep in mind is that we're also talking about touring capability here. But we didn't have any luggage with us today. We were basically just riding around with backpacks. When you are talking about real travel, you usually have panniers, a lot of luggage and extra weight on the bike. That obviously wasn't part of today's test. I focused a lot on performance, on how the bikes feel to ride. And with the Triumph's engine, I wouldn't say it felt sluggish. It just needs a bit of revs. But once it's properly on the throttle, it's actually really great. And the sound of that 3-cylinder engine is just fantastic. That definitely adds to the fun.
Yeah, you're right about that. My only criticism of the Triumph is that it has a bit less flywheel mass. So when you're riding slower, more technical off-road sections, you need to keep the throttle open and work the clutch carefully. Otherwise, you give it a quick blip and the bike just jumps forward. With the twin-cylinder engines, you simply have a bit more margin there.
Absolutely, but because of my riding style, which is quite dynamic, I generally prefer riding in a lower gear with slightly higher revs anyway. That also lets you control a drift much more precisely. So for me, it didn't stand out that much, because I'm usually riding at slightly higher revs anyway. While you might already have been riding slowly in second gear, I was probably still in first gear in that situation, and then it doesn't really matter that much. What's really great about the Honda though, is the torque. It has quite a lot of it. You can almost just let it chug along at idle all the time, and it feels very relaxed. I'd say the other bikes are more the type that encourage you to open the throttle a bit. But after riding the whole day, that can also wear you out pretty quickly. With the Honda, you can just cruise along comfortably. As for the bikes with DCT or without DCT, that's a special case. You need a bit of time to get used to it, and you have to be open to the idea. You have to decide whether you want to engage with it. If you're new to it, you should give yourself at least half a day to adapt. I've already ridden several bikes, either with DCT or with clutchless systems, so for me it was relatively easy to get into it. Yeah.
I saw that you were even doing wheelies without any problem with the DCT gearbox. So anyone who says you absolutely need a clutch to lift the front wheel, well, they were proven wrong today. I can definitely admit that much. And when it comes to comfort, is that something that matters to you at all? Or do you not really care as long as the performance is right?
To be honest, today I didn't focus that much on comfort. That's just a different approach. We were riding for one day, relaxed in the morning, relaxed in the afternoon. In that case, the bike can be a bit wild and dynamic. That's totally fine. But of course, it's a different story if you're traveling for longer. I don't know how long you're usually out, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then that aspect obviously becomes much more important. In that case, it absolutely makes sense for the bike to be very comfortable, and many other advantages suddenly take on a completely different level of importance.
All right, that was a very diplomatic answer, so I'll ask Wolf instead. Wolf, which one of these 4 bikes would be your comfort favorite? You're usually on the road much longer. Which one would you pick if you knew the trip was going to last longer than our usual 2 or 3 days?
I'd probably choose between the Africa Twin and the Triumph Tiger, especially if I'm traveling with a passenger. If the trip has a strong off-road focus though, then I'd go for the KTM here. In that case, I'm willing to accept that the ride to get there might be a bit less comfortable because once you arrive, you've got more performance off-road. But like you said, the F900 GS really isn't far behind in terms of the center of gravity. I just love that low center of gravity. That really makes a difference.
Yeah, I have to say that too. It's kind of a unique feature of that bike. It's one of the reasons why the KTM always feels a bit more manageable off-road than the rest of the competition, because thanks to that low center of gravity, it simply feels like a lighter bike.
Exactly, but the GS is definitely very agile as well.
Absolutely. The only thing I can criticize about the GS is that I ran into a fuel issue earlier. It's just a small tank at 14.5 liters, which isn't ideal for long distance touring. If you want more range, you really have to look at the Honda or the Triumph. Those bikes are much better for covering long stretches comfortably.
I have to say too, I spent quite a bit of time on the F900 GS today as well, so I did burn a fair amount of fuel. That's always part of it, of course. You can pace yourself if you know you need to cover some distance. But today I didn't really focus on conserving fuel, so that's partly my fault.
Did you get a sense of the suspension today? Which stock suspension setup worked best for you as a kind of compromise between gravel and tarmac?
Well, if you like riding dynamically, then as Wolf said, the KTM is really the one. It gives a bit more feedback because it's stiffer, which is nice if you like to ride fast, especially over edges or rough terrain. But of course, that also means it's less comfortable. It can feel a bit choppy. You probably noticed it yourself, given your background and the strain on the wrists. It can actually be a bit counterproductive in that sense, but personally, coming from a racing background, I've always ridden stiffer bikes, so for me it's great for dynamic riding.
So suspension really is an important factor for you on a bike. You're not just judging by engine performance, and you said with your GS you haven't changed anything. You're running the stock suspension.
Exactly, completely stock suspension. And often people ask me as an expert, Bernd, what's your favorite bike? And I always say there isn't one because it depends so much on the situation. I really enjoy riding every bike here, but it depends on the context. Today, out off-road, there were a few sections with little dust where you could really push and open the throttle properly. That's where the KTM was clearly the best. You can handle rock edges quickly, and the electronics in rally mode let you shift up and down seamlessly. That's a very refined feature. And the Africa Twin's torque, I really liked it. And in terms of riding position, I felt comfortable on all bikes, but the Africa Twin in particular. The engine itself I thought was really great.
So you think the ergonomics for standing up aren't really ideal? It's more a bike for touring where you spend most of the time seated and standing is secondary?
Probably, yes.
All right, Wolf, Bernd just told us what he needs for riding fast. What about you, Victor? What do you need for high-speed riding?
I also feel more comfortable on the KTM when riding fast, although I have to admit my fast is still slower than Bernd's. I noticed that he was already signaling at me when I was on full throttle, but it's just like that. It's different for everyone, and that's one of the great things about adventure bikes. They can do so much. There's always a compromise between long-distance touring and off-road capability. You can really see that with these 4 bikes. 2 of them are a bit more comfortable and still very capable off-road, and the others are less comfortable or better off-road, but still reasonably comfortable, just not to the same level. So if you were going on holiday with a naked bike, for example, you'd probably appreciate the KTM more in terms of comfort. It's always relative. All 4 bikes can do everything to some extent. It's just that each one does some things better than the others.
All right, let's get a bit more specific because I'm not letting you off that easily. Bernd, let's go through each bike one by one. Tell me what you like about it and what you'd improve. Let's start with the BMW F900 GS over there. Pros, cons?
What I really like about the BMW is the usability and the electronics. Of course, part of that comes from the fact that I've been riding BMWs for many years, but the riding modes are very logically arranged. Wet road, throw it into race mode, and it's all set up immediately. And you can adjust it at any time while riding. For me, that's the classic top BMW feature. The suspension, if you want to ride fast, is a bit too comfortable for my taste. I'd personally like it a touch stiffer. But of course, we have adjustable suspension here. We just haven't changed anything yet.
We didn't have time for that today because we were basically squeezed into the presentation schedule. We did what we could, so you're saying the suspension is still a little too soft for you?
Yes, exactly.
Next up, the Africa Twin. You already mentioned the standing position isn't ideal. What do you particularly appreciate about it?
Definitely the engine. Incredible torque. It just sticks to the throttle at all times. That's the main thing for me.
What about the KTM 890 Adventure?
The KTM 890 Adventure has a suspension setup that's stiff enough for fast riding, and I really like it for drifting. Also, the electronics, more or less, allow you to make small adjustments while riding. I should admit though, when I ride dynamically, the traction control is usually off anyway. So in practice, it doesn't really matter. But it's a great feature.
And the downside?
Downside? That's actually hard to say. Most things really worked quite well. I especially liked the standard off-road mode, the one we started in when they said we should leave the off-road mode on. I found it very smooth with traction control and power reduced. But of course, that's just my personal feeling. I'm curious how you feel about it. That's kind of the one minor point.
And finally, the Triumph?
What bothered me today, let's say, was, well, the briefing made it clear. With a 50/50 bike like this, there's a little limitation where you can't change the riding mode everywhere on the move, even in off-road mode. I understand the safety aspect, of course.
You mean the Enduro Pro mode, right? The really sharp off-road mode?
Exactly. In fact, everything was even switched off in that mode, but it's one of those aspects where I think, yeah, having to stop to switch from road mode to off-road, whether normal off-road or Enduro Pro, that annoyed me a bit about the Triumph. I love the sound of the 3-cylinder engine, and when it's on the throttle, it rides beautifully. Many people might be a bit critical of it, but for me, the sound is just amazing. And yes, it has good throttle response. I really like it.
Same question for you, Wolf. Let's start with the BMW. What's your highlight and what's its weakness?
Definitely the agility. Out of all these adventure bikes, it really gives that almost bike-like feeling. Even when it got a bit tricky, I always felt in control. The downside, as you already mentioned, the tank could be bigger for touring. I'd say it's borderline.
And what about the Honda?
The engine is really a beast. I totally agree with Bernd. I like the DCT too, though I'd probably never buy it because it makes the bike about 10 kilos heavier. But I enjoy it every time I ride it. And when you're in tricky sections, you don't have to worry about which gear you're in. I really like that. The downside, maybe the high center of gravity.
I can reveal stars. Wolf didn't want to sit on the Africa Twin in the trickier sections today. So that probably says it all about the center of gravity.
Okay, now you've caught me again. KTM. Yeah, the handling thanks to the low center of gravity is just great. I also really like the engine. It's a really lively motor. If you want a criticism, then as a touring rider, comfort, especially with two people, isn't quite the same as on the other bikes. Yeah, there's something similar at home in my garage, the Husqvarna Norden, but that wasn't part of today's test. So it's basically just this bike with the engine, the low center of gravity, and a bit more comfort.
And finally, the Triumph.
Finally, the Triumph. Yeah, I'm a confirmed 3-cylinder fan. I had a Triumph Tiger 800 XC that I sold last year with 168,000 kilometers on the clock. So I have some experience with 3-cylinder engines. True. If you want to ride it sportily, you have to rev it out. That's just the way it is, but you can also ride it smoothly. It's a really lively engine. What I don't like so much is the usability. The other bikes show that it can be done better.
All right, then I'll give my opinion too, whether you care or not. The BMW F900 GS, the agility is amazing. What bothers me a bit is the suspension, which I find a little too stiff. But as you said, there are plenty of adjustment options, so you can change that. With the Africa Twin, I'm a big fan of the engine. It's incredible. Revs beautifully from low down, and it's definitely the best bike for two-up riding. My downside, I really don't like the electronics concept with the touch display and all the 16 buttons. It just confuses me. Even though I ride it often, I can't remember how to operate all the modes. For the KTM, fantastic low center of gravity, fantastic engine. Downside, yeah, a bit limited touring comfort, maybe because of the small tank and its position. You feel a bit exposed to the elements. Yeah, it's certainly not my first choice for long distance touring. And the Triumph, I'd say the only thing that bothers me is the low flywheel mass, which makes life off-road a bit trickier. But the engine is great and the touring comfort is good too. I just maybe wish it was a little lighter. Finally, Bernd, for your stunt riding, if you had to pick one, which would you ride?
Which one would I ride? That depends on the stunt. If it's an off-road stunt, then definitely the KTM, as I said before. If it's more general riding, it's hard to say. Honestly, with the Africa Twin, it's super easy. The engine works well on all bikes. In the end, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is to be on the bike, have a great day, and enjoy riding.
Okay. Wolf, if you had to pay for it yourself, which of these 4 bikes would you buy?
If I regularly ride with a passenger, so if it has to be my only bike, then it would be the Africa Twin. And if it's just for solo touring, then it would be this one.
All right, I understand. For me, the biggest joy of motorcycling and still off-road riding means the choice is always between the KTM and the BMW. And yeah, I don't know. It'll probably end up being the KTM because I feel safer with the low center of gravity than on the BMW. Although the BMW was really close today, I'd need to sleep on that one. That would be fair. Anyway, I hope this video gave you some interesting insights. We actually produced it almost on the fly today because the opportunity just came up. But we'll definitely produce more tests over the season where one or more of these bikes will surely feature again. I hope you can give us a thumbs up for today's effort. Hopefully you've already subscribed to the channel. If not, please do us a favor and hit that button. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to being out on the road with you again soon. See you from your Clemo, your Bernd, and your Wolf.